Good afternoon. I'm Anuj Mehrotra, Dean of the School of Business at the George Washington University, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this episode of George Talks Business. Today, our honored guest is Sharon Marcil, who is the Boston Consulting Group's North America Regional Chair. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you, Dean.
So, Sharon, it's so good to have you here. And I know you, first of all, congratulations. I believe this is a relatively new role for you. And I wanted to start with your career at BCG and tell us about how you started there and what has taken you to where you are today. And then perhaps a little bit about what your responsibilities are and what your work is like in today's role.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So first, let me say it's a pleasure to be here with you, and actually on day 3 of the role, I was announced probably 6 weeks ago, but my first day in role as North America Chair was Friday, so very early on in terms of the tenure. But I have been at BCG for 25 years. I started right out of business school as a summer consultant many years back and have had a great journey at BCG. Started in our New York office, actually moved to Washington in the early 2000s with my husband and have raised my 2 girls here. Had my first daughter early on in my career when I was just a few years in, and then my second daughter actually right about the time I made partner, and spent most of my career serving clients and working on tough problems and working with great teams. And that's sort of the core of who I am and what I've done at BCG. I've also had the privilege of doing some roles at BCG. My first really important role was working on the Women's Initiative. So our CEO back then and early on in my partner tenureship asked me to lead the first ever Women's Initiative in North America. And back then we had 50 senior women leaders in North America. Today, I'm proud to say we have over 1,000. So we've been on a great journey in terms of diversity, but that's also a super important part of what I've done at BCG. I've also had the privilege of serving on our executive committee, which is our global board of directors, and also our operating committee, which is our global group that operates the company for the last 9 and 3 years, respectively. And that was in my previous role as the chief marketing officer for BCG and also the client team chief for BCG. But as you said, Dean, I now am the leader of North America, which includes Mexico, Canada, and in the US. It's very early days, but super excited to take on the role.
Well, that's a fantastic career, and I'm certainly very interested in following up on the role that you have played in and getting more women into the positions at BCG. Because as you might or might not know, majority of our programs at GW in the School of Business here have majority women in most of the programs. So we are hopefully preparing the right set of leaders for tomorrow, for not just BCG, but for the boardrooms of the future. But let me, and I'll get back to that because I think that's a very important topic in itself. But I was talking to Dr. Nora Gardner from McKinsey last week, and this is a curious question I want to pose to you as well. During this entire pandemic, the consulting job has changed. I often think of people having that charm of not ever sleeping on their own bed except once a week and traveling all around to client sites and whatnot. And that has changed. So tell us a little bit about how BCG has adapted and how your clients themselves have adapted to this pandemic over a period of time.
It's a great question, Dean. And I remember right as COVID was striking, being actually pretty local, an hour away, with a big team in a client team room, and being on the phone with members of the operating committee and the executive committee, talking about what they were seeing in Asia and around the world, with this big team room and all these people crowded in. And literally, we went from that setup, which was kind of on site every day except for Friday, to boom, overnight, we were at home. And within 12 hours, we had cleared out that team room. Everyone was at home. And actually, we started working right away. I don't even think we lost a day with our clients. And we learned to work in a very different way. And I think, but for the kind of challenge of having to do so all at once, I'm not sure that we would have completely developed the muscle. But we have been remote now for a long time. We're actually back to getting on site with clients and with each other, which is super exciting. But I think the great thing is we actually built certain muscle with respect to our ways of working and the ability to work remotely. We also recognize there were some advantages. So, for example, you could zoom in our experts from all around the world. So top talent from Asia, top talent from Europe, and so this notion of an expanded and truly global expert team you could really bring to bear over Zoom. And I think we'll never lose that muscle. And I also think that as we start thinking about new ways of working and the go forward, it will be different because I think we realized that we wanted to be with our clients and we need to be with our clients and we need to be with each other. But there's actually a fair degree of flexibility that we didn't totally envision or totally experience before that now we have built into kind of how we work and what we do. I also think during COVID, it actually helped us to focus on some things. I mean, people were going through stuff in terms of the isolation of some. And I think it helped BCG to focus on some things, including mental health and well-being benefits. And we did a lot of things for our employees to kind of lead them and help them through that period. I mean, we call it the balance sheet, but focus on the people and focus on the balance sheet. So I think we always had that muscle, but I think that COVID was an event that helped us refocus and push in that direction.
So actually, you have touched upon so many interesting themes here, and since you mentioned the mental health, let me take a little bit dive into that. What are some of the best practices that you are seeing your clients or BCG with regard to the mental health issues that are certainly at the forefront, not just in companies, but also we are looking at that at the university, for example. So would love to hear a little bit of thoughts on what the best practices that you are seeing are. Obviously, the bottom line is institutions or companies are made of people, and you're really concentrating on the people first, without the balance sheet first. So tell us a little bit more about some ideas that you might have.
So I think I'm sure like you, Dean, none of us feel that we've totally cracked it. I think some things we're doing. So first of all, we're talking about it. I mean, it starts there. Everyone has something, right? And actually having leaders, people with power, people in position, senior people all the way down, talking about some of the challenges they have faced and just being cognizant that people are going through stuff at various times in terms of their career and during this time. I think that's thing one. I think thing two is in the COVID environment, even more so than in the kind of working together environment, I think what we saw was that people could work from really early in the morning until really late at night and not allow themselves breaks. I think when you're in a team room, when you're surrounded by people, whether it's breaking for lunch or breaking for a coffee break or breaking for dinner, or to work out, I think there's a little bit more of the peer nudge to kind of take care of yourself and to have breaks. And I think in a more isolated environment, people weren't always taking care of themselves. So it's really about building and training people on how do you build in time to take care of yourself and how do you have that conversation with your direct line manager around what you need, whether it's the workout or the dinner or driving your kids to school. Now that kids are back in school, it's going to depend on the person, but all of us need those mental health breaks. We've also offered support in terms of more formal support, so for people in terms of telemedicine. Another, outcome of COVID has been an increase in telemedicine. And so there's an opportunity to engage with mental health experts, either in person or actually more typically these days, in terms of telemedicine. So we've really encouraged people to take advantage of that benefit as well.
No, those are great answers, and I think they are really interesting, particularly to one of our faculty members, Katrina Sawyer, who is really studying and doing research on the well-being at the workplace. And some of these things that you're talking about really align very well with that. So I appreciate your taking this question. So you did mention that COVID is an event, and perhaps there are certain things that there have been certain advantages that you have streamlined operations or found the muscle, as you put it. But do you see that this is going to change? Has this initiated a global experiment in really productivity and performance overall? And do you believe that the nature of the work and the workplace will change? And what would that be in the future? And this is a question that, we are all struggling with really fully to answer, but would love your thoughts on that.
It's a great question. And some of the productivity, frankly, in our industry and at BCG that we've captured during COVID, we actually might be prepared to give back some of that productivity because we're not sure how much of that productivity in terms of pure output we totally want to keep, and I can get back to that and elaborate that a little bit more. But I do think, look, all of us in the industry and who spent so much time in transit and on planes and in lines, at least on a plane you can get something done, but when you're in a line you can't get anything done. All of a sudden realize these benefits of several hours, a day and many, many hours a week. And I think particularly for internal travel, but also for client travel, really thinking through what needs to be in person and what doesn't. And what are the things that we can continue to do on a virtual basis. I think once relationships are established, an enormous amount can get done on a virtual basis. And we have a ways of working program at a global level and at a North American level that we continue to evolve, and pilots that we continue to run to really think through, what are some of the things we really want to hold on to post-COVID. And it's still, as work in progress, but I personally don't think we're ever going to go back to where we were.
So that is interesting, and I'm hearing such a spectrum of responses depending on who we are talking to about this. So this is good to know, and you certainly are in a very good position to be able to comment on that. But let me also ask you a very related question, especially in times of COVID. Now, in the last few months, we are hearing reports where more than 15 million U.S. workers have counted or quit their jobs since just April 2021. So are you seeing that? And what are the causes of this attrition? Because oftentimes we are hearing that these folks who are quitting work are not necessarily placed in another place, but they are just quitting at this point, looking for something different perhaps. But do you have any sense of what is going on and what is the cause of this attrition?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think, a lot has been written about this great resignation and people that have experienced COVID and they're really rethinking it is, what they want to do, who they want to be. And I think for many industries, including consulting, I think it's really is about recalibrating and re-recruiting, because I think companies, including BCG, will have to be clearer, with respect to their purpose, what they're delivering, and why to work there. I actually am not that worried about the Great Resignation. I think a lot of these people are going through inflection points and will come back and show up, in very productive ways. And it's just a little bit of a blip. But I do think for the BCGs of the world, we need to be articulate in terms of why BCG, how we are differentiated, the impact we're having on society, and also what a great experience BCG is in terms of building one's career. And so for me, it's an inflection point that offers an opportunity around calibration and re-recruitment.
So there has also been a sense, especially as a dean of a business school, I've certainly been feeling it over the last few years, perhaps a decade, of how the market demands have shifted over a period of time, and the pace at which they have been shifting has been enormous. And I somehow feel that pace potentially that is going to be in the next couple of years will be unmatched. And if that is changing, are the skill sets that you are needing in consulting shifted? Have they shifted? What is it that is going to be in high demand, and what are the careers or what are the job opportunities or the skill sets you feel will be certainly something that would be of increasing demand in the marketplace in the next few years?
Yeah, why don't I start with consulting, because that's the industry I know best, and then maybe talk a little bit about what the implications are for universities and also for the government. I serve the government as my core client. So in consulting, look, I think the skills we've always looked for is drive and energy, intellectual curiosity, analytical capacity, and communication. I think those skills are as relevant today as they were 25 years ago when I joined BCG. I think in addition to that, you know, consultants or associates are coming in with, or we train for, you know, digital skills, more sophisticated analytical skills. So in my day, Excel was just fine. I think now, we're looking for people with more analytical skill sets. Now, not everyone who comes in has those skill sets. We have great training programs to help develop that. But I think consulting, the pace of what we're being asked to do has accelerated. We have people who come in with kind of the core consulting skill set, thinking back many years ago. In addition, we have a lot more experts than we used to have, and experts not just at the senior level, but experts, who are coming in from PhD programs and at various levels that help contribute to kind of the bulk of the associate and consultant class, by offering specific skill sets. But we are doing a lot of foundational training, around the digital skills and around the analytical skills as well. So the pace of change is fast. We still recruit for a core set of skills, but we also train a lot, to upskill and to make sure that our consultants and associates are well positioned, for our client work. And then maybe you asked about reskilling. Look, if you look at a bunch of jobs have gone away, many of them have been in the service industry, a lot in terms of travel and tourism. Most of those jobs, many of those jobs have come back, but not all of them. And I think that, if you look at the jobs that didn't go away, it was the jobs that were able to migrate to not in person and actually more technically, sophisticated jobs. And so if you look at the shift accelerated by COVID, but a shift that's been happening over time, as a public sector priority, we're going to have to help people develop the skill sets for the future, from a basic service economy to skills that include richer, capabilities in terms of thinking, in terms of analytics. And as a matter of public policy, that is something that the government will need to focus on going forward, because you're absolutely right. It ramped up during COVID, and it's only going to accelerate into the future.
So you actually mentioned that you're not worried as much about the attrition because you do expect people to come back and bounce back. You also mentioned some of the industries which are beginning to bounce back, like tourism, and they may not be there quite yet. But would love to hear a little bit more on what you think would be the post-pandemic recovery and what the recovery phases might look like. And what are some of the challenges, because the customer preferences may have changed, that companies are facing in today's date?
Yeah, I think in terms of the post-pandemic, look, I think many sectors have recovered and recovered at pace. So, thinking about durables, I mean, the durable sector is thinking about new home construction. New home construction has really taken off. I do think, in terms of where there's a gap, which worries me, is, if you look who lost their jobs during the pandemic, it tended to be less educated people, it tended to be non-white males, and it tended to be women. And women lost their jobs for a variety of reasons in terms of where they were participating in the economy, but also because of some of the burdens of childcare and caring for the home. And so for me, in terms of recovery, it's about how do we help those sets of folks, participate in the new economy, because we won't be as great as we can be if we don't upskill those folks and ensure that they have their right place, in the future of the economy.
Oh, that's an excellent point that you're making, and I think it kind of wants me to bring back the original question that we started out with, where you were talking about how you have been able to help and promote the number of women at BCG, for example. And there are many other topics of current interest that have come. They are at the forefront in today's date, whether it is related to diversity, equity, or inclusion, or whether it's related to ESG or climate change. I would love to hear a little bit from you about what some of the best practices may be in the corporate world that you are seeing, and where do you see some of these issues panning out in the next few years?
Those are all really important issues right now that we're talking to our public sector clients and CEO clients about. I mean, those three topics that you just articulated are super hot in terms of where we're working right now. I mean, I will give you my view on. So I run used to run our public sector practice in North America, and it was our most diverse practice in terms of race and in terms of gender, and it was a highly effective team, and it was a great team. And I think one of the things that we realize is that diversity is actually such a great strength. And in the practices and places in BCG where we have the greatest diversity, we have the greatest strength. And I think so diversity equals impact on business and impact in terms of growth. Thinking back to when I ran the Women's Initiative, this is years ago, I remember I produced this analysis that said, you know, women in a nutshell. So let me just distill it. You know, the women who we hire into the summer consulting class actually do as well or better as the men, and they're more likely to come back and they're more likely to stay. So that's right there, you know, was a business analysis. I mean, we knew we needed to get better in terms of women, but it was a business analysis that actually underscored why. And so I think diversity, not just diversity, but inclusion is a super important topic. And I know a lot of our CEO clients and public sector clients are working on that. In addition, in terms of climate, again, talking about things that are accelerating coming out of the COVID experience, I think that it is such a hot topic and such an important topic, and we see what's happening in the world around us. And I don't think there's a public sector official or, you know, frankly, a CEO that doesn't have this on her or his mind. Now, how it shows up is going to be different sector by sector, and so BCG has to have an overall view, of course, but then also have a sector level view in terms of what it means for our clients and for our industries. But it is one of the most important topics that we're working on these days, and a place where all of our clients want to do better and many of them are making commitments. And now it's actually beyond the commitments. What is the strategy and execution plan to get there? So again, a super important topic, one which has been, you know, in the last, you know, year, you know, even much more accelerated than in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I look forward to hearing more about that in the future as more things develop sector by sector, as you are pointing out. But I would, you know, I think it's important for me on behalf of the students to ask you another question, because many of our students, their dream job in consulting is to start at BCG. So tell us a little bit about the inside scoop, which our students can really benefit from on how being successful at that kind of when they're seeking a position at BCG, and perhaps also equally important to point out some of the mistakes students might make in their interview process that you might be in a position to help them guide against.
Yeah. So I would say, look, it's easier said than done, but have fun with the interviewing process. You know, it's about problem solving. It's about meeting people. You won't be perfect on your case, and that's okay. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, you know, authentically who you are, and then it's about doing your best to actually frame and solve the problem. And, you know, at BCG, we're not looking for a right answer, the one way of thinking. There's multiple ways to solve a problem. And we're looking for, you know, creativity. We're looking for a little bit analytical, you know, ability to drive something analytically. And we're looking for people who can communicate and just show up you know, as who they are. I mean, I guess one other tip would be practice. I think it can never hurt to practice, you know, some of the cases and the like. But I would say, if you can, just relax and be who you are, and don't worry about the answer, because there are many good answers.
So let me ask, Fareed. I think I got your question answered already, but let me also ask, you know, let me also get Allison's question answered, which she is really asking about what is that piece of advice that you can offer to women that are really beginning their professional careers in business. And if I may actually expand it to not just advice for women, but anybody who's beginning their professional careers, if you were to go back in time, what were some of the things that were important then are important now, and how maybe there are certain things which are important today that may not have been playing that important role back then. So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that advice for our students.
Yeah. You know, I think being present, working hard, doing your best, and taking feedback. I mean, it seems so simple. I would say if I looked back on my younger self and I gave her advice, but I think it applies equally to men, I would say, you know, something that my dear friend Miki Tasaka, who works out of our Tokyo office, said to me. It's not about you and rise above. She used to say, "It's not about you and rise above." What does that mean? It means don't take things personally. Like take the feedback, but it's not personal. Personal. Just take the feedback, incorporate it, have a growth mindset. You're going to make mistakes. It won't be perfect, but if you can have that growth mindset and incorporate the feedback and learn from it, and not be upset by it or not get downtrodden. I think it's the best career advice. Also, look, I mean, I stayed at BCG for a very long time. Many of you will not stay at your jobs, for nearly as long as I stayed at BCG, but I did try new things, and I had a lot of fun. So whether it was taking very early in my career, the Women's Initiative, to running recruiting, to working the consumer industry and running our consumer practice, and then shifting over to public sector, try new things. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, it's okay. It's okay. Each thing you try is an adventure, and you'll learn from it. And as long as you're learning and enjoying, it's a valuable thing to have done.
Yeah, well, it's really been fascinating talking to you, and I know we can go on forever, but I want to respect your time. But I still also want to ask one more question that one of our students, Sharon, has submitted, and Sharon is asking if there has been one engagement or client early in your career who may have made a big lasting impact on you. Can you recall something like that and share that experience?
I have these signature clients and signature experiences throughout my career, which has given me energy to keep going. But I will answer your question. If I could, I'll pick one. I remember during 9/11, I was working at Treasury. And I remember there was 9/11. I was working at Treasury, and I was working with a private sector client up in New York. And I actually landed in New York on 9/11. But I was working at Treasury, and subsequent to the 9/11 attacks, there was a carve out of the Homeland Security assets, which partially came out of Treasury. And that was also the time of anthrax. And I just remember working with that team at Treasury and how close we all became, because it was such an important time for the country and such an important time for the agency. There's many moments at which I've been proud at BCG, and many clients that I've adored working with. But I remember so fondly that team and that work, and just having greater purpose and being able to contribute, in my mind at the time, in an outsized way. Not only to the firm BCG and to our people, but to our country.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. It's been really fun talking to you, and thanks for sharing. Your career is an inspiration to many of our students, not just women, but all our students in that regard. And it's just been you have touched upon some very interesting advice and points and thoughts. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you also to everybody who joined us today. And I do want to also invite you to the next episode of George Talks Business. Next week, our distinguished guest will be Natasha Crampton, Chief Responsible AI Officer at Microsoft. And we will be joined by the Dean of GW School of Engineering and Applied Science, John Lack, who will be co-hosting that session with me. Again, thank you for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you next week.